we can do in revenue operations is very much a complement to that. It's taking the methodology that you get from sales coaches or from sales and thought leaders, and trying to distill that down into really easy to use ways to interact with your CRM and your tooling.
Yeah. So give me the landscape first of all, and the context for what you've been doing in new processes.
Specifically new processes.
Yeah, new processes, but also relationships between different revenue teams.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I've recently taken up a new position as head of revenue operations at Paddle. Which naturally is a little bit broader topic than sales operations, which we're generally talking, and includes fundamentally marketing operations as well. That fundamentally actually is really the sort of angle at which I've been brought in to try and improve things at Paddle, and trying to take us from very much a startup that's been enjoying some tremendous triple-digit growth over the last couple of years, and really start to build out a series of scalable processes. So I suppose the kind of landscape there is, as you'll often find in commercial organizations, there can be quite a bit of friction between sales and marketing. Typically, all about top of the funnel. Is marketing contributing enough for demand gen? Are sales actually actioning what is coming through that funnel from the marketing team? Are they responding quickly enough? Are they doing things effectively? And of course, at the end of the day, everyone is focused on trying to ensure that we get as much pipeline as possible for the business to be able to drive revenue goals. Everyone has that same goal. However, naturally, because marketing and sales come at it quite differently, it's often a source of friction. So that's kind of the landscape around which I've taken on this role at Paddle, is very much to ensure that we operate in a way in which we can really maximize our efficiency and our ways of working together, and to with the end goal of making sure that we are generating as much pipeline as possible, specifically as much pipeline in our target addressable market, from people who are actively attempting to engage with us, and then ensuring that our sales teams are properly equipped through tools and processes to be able to really prioritize, go after, and bring these prospects in as revenue as quickly as possible.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. So, when you look at your background, you've worked at some awesome companies, like a Currency Cloud, like a Zendesk. Do you think it's a natural part of scale up and rapid growth that you get friction between sales and marketing? And is this something that naturally we tend to see, and then we see it addressed as companies grow, or is that nonsense, do you think?
No, I very much do think it is natural. And actually, I think it's a good thing. If you don't have that friction in the first place, then actually you've probably got one or both teams not really caring about driving the right actions. Having friction means that we're constantly challenging each other, and it means that we really have the best interest of the business at heart. So it's very much a positive thing. However, what you really want to avoid is making that friction toxic. It needs to be a case of everyone remains on point, everyone remains respectful of each other, and everyone really feels like they're serviced properly. And I see revenue operations as fundamentally being the grease behind that. We service both marketing and sales. We need to do it equitably, and we need to ensure that everything works efficiently. But really, we provide the data, the insights, we provide the processes that enable everything to work properly and for people to not really be at each other's throats.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so I think you are just such a great case study for other people, because like you said, you've literally come into a business, you're 2 months in. What do you do in your first 2 months when you see there's friction between teams? What are your immediate actions to help resolve that?
Fundamentally, I think it's the most important thing to do is to actually try and absorb as much as possible about the business as you can within that short time period. I think it can be more harmful than it can be effective to come in and immediately start changing things, actually. You don't understand the full context behind some of these conversations that are going on. You don't know what the business has tried before. And really attempting to understand what's driving those relationships and what's potentially driving that friction is way more important. Then, you know, it may take several weeks for you to really understand where you can make an impact, but if you can change one or two things in a very specifically targeted way because you understand the situation, it's much better than making, you know, 10 or so changes across a period of a couple of months because you got it wrong the first couple of occasions. I mean, it's all about understanding exactly what needs to be done.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, let's get really specific now. So what metrics and what data do you need to start digging into to understand where the problems lie?
To be honest, with those relationships, it's always about pipeline. So it's always top of the funnel. And very much it does depend on how the business is actually attempting to go to market. So in this case, specifically with Paddle, our approach to go to market is account-based marketing. So we're not particularly interested in inbound. We don't, in fact, really acknowledge such a thing as inbound. But we need to ensure that we have as many opportunities being created as we possibly can, because we want to continue to generate that growth across the next several years. And, you know, we want to continue that triple-digit growth as much as we can. So specifically in terms of metrics, it's really key to understand exactly what is driving the different aspects of the pipeline. What's coming in at the top and what's coming in at the bottom are the really, really easy bits. But you need to understand what is driving that conversion rate and get a little bit more granular. So in our case, we need to understand how people are beginning to engage in the platform. Is that a case of any form submissions? Is it a case of advert clicks? Is it a case of website browsing? So their engagement and their intent. We also need to understand the metrics of, once we've understood that, how are our business development team beginning to actually engage with those prospects? What sort of speed at which are they able to respond? Are there potentially any major effects to our conversion rates if we change our messaging? What is proving to be effective? So there are a huge number of points that you can get to from there. And then once we understand what actually works as an effective conversion to actually a meaningful conversation, we need to understand the metrics that really drive that conversation, frankly, making sure that we've got the conversation with the right person to become an opportunity, at which point we can pass it over to the sales team. One of the really strong benefits that we have at Paddle is we've got a very strong sales team, to the point that once we give them the opportunities, our data is indicating that actually we don't have too much to worry about in terms of our win rates. However, I'm sure there's quite a bit that we can actually do to improve that. Of course there is. You can always improve your sales team's performance. But really what we need to do here is ensure that we've got enough of the right pipeline, but also that we're able to act on the pipeline efficiently, and we're targeting the right people.
Yeah, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So here's something I'm interested in. You said you were brought in specifically to address this issue. I'm wondering, what are the conversations that were being had in management and in upper tiers in the business for this to be recognized, first of all, especially when people may or may not be looking into the data, and then to really have an honest conversation that this is something that needs to be addressed? Do you think, what's happened there? Is it a cultural change? Is it a growth change? Is it people looking into the data and realizing there's disunity? Where does it come from?
To be specific, there's not we don't have a culture problem.
Sorry. By the way, I didn't mean. Sorry, that was probably a poor choice of words. Yeah.
No problem. Really. So fundamentally, the reason why I was brought in was for scalable growth. The conversations going on where Paddle's got as far as it has got through as much as anything else, really understanding that commercial and revenue operations can have a huge impact in how to grow a business.
Yeah.
One of the things, in fact, the main thing actually that attracted me to this business, other than it's actually such a brilliant business idea that I wonder why I didn't come up with it myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than that, was very much our founders, Harris and Christian, put a huge amount of focus on the impact that we can have on driving our sales business through data, through actually understanding what we're doing. And we've built out, I say we've built out, the team here has built out a really fantastic tool called the Software Universe that maps out our target addressable market for us. So we know everyone who we actually want to go and focus on, and we're starting to monitor for the individual sales signals for them. Now, I was brought in specifically to improve upon the team to the point that we can actually start to scale. And I'm doing that in a couple of ways. Number one is very much kind of that relationship piece. It's ensuring that we're effectively servicing sales and marketing, and that we're basically greasing the wheels to make sure that they can perform as effectively as they possibly can. The other kind of ways that I'm looking at improving things is through I see revenue operations fundamentally as being effective through 3 pillars. Number one, data and insights. We have an exceptional team of analysts here. They're the key piece for how we've been managing to continue this growth. So it's really ensuring that we're expanding upon that analyst team. We're enabling them to drive the right insights to really allow us to focus in the right places for pipeline generation, also for our sales, and they'll also fundamentally affect the next 2 pillars. The first of which is growth engineering, is our commercial data stack, ensuring that we're getting all of the data from a myriad of sources. We have our software universe that I mentioned. We're also constantly enriching that through sources such as Clearbit. We're pulling in a lot of information from HubSpot in terms of form fills, what people are actually browsing on our website. We're using, of course, Google Analytics. We've got a lot of we're doing a lot of digital marketing through social platforms like Influtu. Additionally, we're utilizing tools like Outreach for our very targeted cadence messaging. And of course, at the other end, we have a commercial stack of for our analytical tools. Now, that's kind of the second pillar, and the third is enabling. And actually, the bit that I really think we do need to drill down in, and this is kind of where my expertise comes in, it's very much around the end user tooling for people like sales and marketing. It's ensuring that we have best in class Salesforce and HubSpot tooling, so that the teams can be as efficient as possible. They can be as effective as possible. We're creating tools and processes that allow them to utilize our methodologies in an efficient manner. And ensuring that they're actually adequately trained in how to use these things. That for me is actually the piece that really probably is where we can improve as a business. And where I think we can drive some quite rapid improvements. And through that sort of tooling, ensuring that the sales and marketing people have the right metrics in front of them, they've got the adequate tooling to be able to go and do their job effectively. That's really how we're going to be improving the relationship between the team, but it's also how we're going to be improving our conversion rates.
Okay, so that's really interesting, Ben. I think you bring up 2 really fundamentally great questions, which is number one, I'm interested to know what you think about where revenue ops should sit. It's like, what fundamental function do they serve here? Do they drive strategy? Do they drive kind of sales enablement? Do they drive analytics? Because everyone kind of has a different idea here. Do they drive coaching? So first of all, what's your personal philosophy there? Like, if we were to look in revenue ops in like an organizational view, where does it sit and what's its fundamental purpose and job?
That's a good question. For me, it sits fundamentally across data and analytics and across tooling. There are elements of enablement for sure, but I'm fundamentally a believer that we're not sales coaches. There's a real there is a very much a very valuable function in ensuring that your salespeople are adequately trained. They have a proper career path. They've got a lot of training and coaching to enable them to go and ask the right questions. Now that in and of itself is a completely separate function, and there's a lot of really impressive people out there who excel at that. I'd recommend anyone to take advantage of their services. What we can do in revenue operations is very much a complement to that. It's taking the methodology that you get from sales coaches or from sales and thought leaders, and trying to distill that down into really easy to use ways to interact with your CRM and your tooling.
Yeah.
For example, ensuring that you've got the correct Salesforce setup and Salesforce processes to go out and, for example, effectively utilize MEDPIC. For me, it is a fundamental failing of revenue operations if you've got salespeople leaving your CRM and going and working through Google spreadsheets, or writing their notes on a note app. That for me says either they're not well enough trained in the tools that they have, or the tools aren't adequate to do the job that they need to do. I think it's a real failing of some revenue operations functions to actually pay adequate attention to, or not pay any adequate attention to, the salespeople. It's all well and good to be involved at that strategic level, make some big decisions, tell them what they need to do. But if you're not actually listening to the people on the ground, you're going to be making a lot of missteps. What you do has to be something that is felt and is able to be affected by the individuals.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that raises another great point, right? The interesting thing is there's so many different routes into revenue ops. You can come through finance, marketing, sales. The fact is, once you get there, you're going to be dealing with a multitude of revenue departments, and some of which you might never have had experience in. You were speaking earlier about marketing, and I was really impressed about your knowledge about the tools and like the key metrics that you need to be aware of. So Ben, as a personal question, how have you gotten familiar with these different revenue teams? How have you gotten familiar with sales? And how do people do it if they may or may not have sold anything in their life? How do they understand that worldview?
Honestly, I'm a big believer in needing to get your hands dirty. Fundamentally, even when you reach the sort of position that I reach, especially when you're coming into a new business, you are never going to understand something adequately to make big strategic decisions if you don't try and actually live with what you're dealing with. One of the first things that I did when I got to this business was to actually start to listen to some phone calls, start to actually read about how we're selling. Also look at the tooling and just play around with it. It would be very easy for someone as a head of a department to kind of have a very high level view and start making some decisions based on their past experience. In reality, that's not going to be good enough for the business to be able to advance. My background initially, before I moved into revenue operations functions, was very much in sales strategy. Several years ago over at Groupon. I have always learned through basically doing and playing around. I'm fundamentally self-taught in many of these areas. Kind of, if I wanted to learn about commissions, I'd get stuck in with a bunch of spreadsheets and really try and understand what worked. And actually start to engage with our finance teams, for example. If I wanted to learn about marketing, I would go and sit with the marketing team and actually talk to them about what their needs are and what they really believe that they need to, they actually need in order to do their job effectively. And then once you have their opinion, it's trying to, drill down to the numbers, actually run some analyses, see if what they're telling you anecdotally is supported by facts, and then really try and understand between those statistics that you've generated and what you're being told, if you can try and support them through some sort of tooling change, or if there's a way that you can process data slightly differently.
Yeah, this is great, Ben. I mean, I think this has an implication on what we were talking about earlier, and it's that piece around where does revenue ops sit in the organization. And I think what I'm learning from you right now is actually revenue ops are so valuable in an organization because actually there's so much in the front lines and the battle lines of every different department doing their job, but they're supposed to have that bigger picture strategic understanding to be able to see the bigger picture and to drive change, I suppose, in the organization. And I'm just wondering if I've interpreted that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, revenue ops fundamentally sits more or less everywhere that touches on revenue.
Yeah.
Which sounds really, kind of obvious and crude to say, but we have we have the ability to make such a fundamental impact. We need to get stuck into all of those separate areas.
Yeah.
And it's really important to ensure that you can work with those stakeholders and you really understand their needs. Otherwise, you're not really going to make a meaningful impact, or you are going to make a meaningful impact, but in completely the wrong way.
Yeah.
But I think the learnings that I personally have within revenue operations and sort of moving away from the separate sales operations functions that I've been in is that sales and if you start to separate sales operations and marketing operations, you almost continue to propagate that friction, especially if they're separate functions and they both exist within the business, because they all have their very specific competing goals. I think revenue operations as a unified function has a really important part to play in keeping that relationship civil, effective, and ensuring that the competing priorities are actually balanced effectively.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so following on from this, when you've aligned your revenue team, what are you dealing with right now in terms of what sales levers are you trying to pull to hit exponential growth? And then following on from that, like, what are the key wins and where are the key battlegrounds to get there in the next 2, 3, 4 months?
That's a good question. For us right now, we're looking at improving our demand gen.
Yeah.
Now, which is a really interesting topic, because we're getting a lot of, I'm going to use the wrong word here, and I know that I'm going to get told off for saying it, but crudely, we're looking at our inbound. It's not really inbound, because say we actually know everyone that we're trying to target, but it's people that are actually starting to engage with our website through us actively targeting them via marketing functions.
Yeah.
So it's ensuring that we're actually adequately servicing people within a specific time period from when they actually contacted us, and ensuring that we're hitting them with the right messaging, and that utilizing that initial engagement, we can start to talk to the right people within the business to enable us to start to advance that conversation.
Yeah.
Now, I realize that I've just mentioned about 4 completely different aspects of demand gen, but all of those play very closely together, and we really need to and are attempting to understand the nuances between every single one of those, what we can actually start to influence, and how we can really drive those to improve our pipeline. But fundamentally, as I say, we're fairly good at winning things once we get them to that opportunity stage, and we're really good at getting engagements. What we really need to drill down in on is how do we actually improve both the time to meaningful conversation and our conversion to meaningful conversation, because that's going to be key to driving our pipeline. Yeah.
Okay. So you're trying to reduce really the length of the sales cycle, and the win rate. But did I get that wrong? Because you said your win rate, your close one is quite good.
Yeah, it's not the win rate. It's much earlier within the pipeline. It's our conversion rate. So we think of, so we don't really think about leads, because we're an account-based marketing business, and we don't really think about inbound or outbounds. What we think about is marketing influenced or marketing sourced versus sales sourced. Sales sourced is very, very much your traditional outbounds, but marketing influenced is, pretty much everything's outbound from the perspective that we're actively marketing to people, but we already know specifically who we're targeting through marketing. Therefore, it's not really inbound. It's still outbound, but of a different mix. What we really need to ensure that we're doing is that once we get some form of engagement, some form of bite from that prospect that we've been going after,
Mm.
that we are fast in responding to it,
Yeah.
And that we're actually responding to it effectively.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to drive our that's how we're going to drive that conversion rate. Once we get someone into a conversation and we have that meaningful conversation, again, we're fairly good at actually moving it along the sales cycle.
Yeah.
There's really that sort of top of funnel piece
Yeah.
that's going to be key to ensuring we've got the pipeline where to hit our revenue goals for the rest of this year. But we're not far off being a bit too far away for being able to influence Q4. What we need now is to focus on our pipeline for Q1 and Q2.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so how are you going to know what success looks like there? It sounds at the moment like you're still exploring what that might look like, but what are your initial thoughts?
Fundamentally, first off, we need to know what our plans are and what our go-to-market strategy is for next year. And that's something that I'm actively working on with our Chief Customer Officer Harrison, and also with our sales and marketing leaders. Once we've got that established, we'll know exactly what kind of pipeline we need to be targeting. Are we, for example, looking at continuing to go after small repeatable business, which happens to have very high velocity, or are we going to start to pivot to much larger businesses, which will have a bigger revenue impact when they do come in, but they may be fewer and further between? How do we actually, what is our go-to-market strategy for next year? Once we've got that, those do have quite different profiles in terms of who we're going after and what an engagement looks like. A smaller repeatable business, we may be able to talk to the CEO really quickly and actually, that's the one engagement we need to have made, and we can convert that into a sale pretty fast. Once you start to look at larger kind of B2B SaaS companies, it's, we need to chat to the CEO, but we also need to chat to the CFO. We need to talk to the CTO and probably the CPO as well, in order to make that sort of meaningful sale. So it's really understanding, what our ICP is fundamentally, which parts of our target addressable market we need to be going after, and making sure that we've got the right engagements to be able to service that pipeline.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Ben, this is really interesting. I think, you guys are in such an interesting phase here, and SaaS companies are so fascinating because the business model is it's kind of crazy, right? You get large rounds of investments, hyper spending for hyper growth, so that your multiples when you go for funding rounds are even bigger and even larger. And I think I'm particularly interested in this because we're in a similar stage here now where we're reaching a pivot or turning point where actually you need to make some very fundamental strategic decisions about where you go next that are going to influence the future of the business and the future of your company. So that's a long preamble, Ben, but I'm really interested to see, it's 2 months in, it's early, but what are your instincts here for, is this a really pivotal moment, and where do you think things are going to go, and what are the possibilities here?
Well, not to personally jump the gun, because it's not my business, and we've not actually we've not established exactly what we're going to be doing for our go-to-market next year. That said, our product enables us to target pretty much anyone internationally, and actually we become a really, really interesting proposition for someone who's actually looking at changing their billing stack. When you're attempting to go for international expansion. And realistically, that sort of international expansion is only going to be coming if you happen to be a B2B SaaS company of a fairly reasonable size. So that's really what we're targeting. North America is a very interesting proposition for us. It's where a lot of B2B SaaS companies actually reside. So that's kind of where we're looking at, and particularly US companies looking at expanding outside of the US. One of the really core parts of our proposition is that we, as a merchant of record, are able to essentially alleviate any sort of tax and legal concerns and prevent companies from having to invest really heavily in their finance and legal teams. For a US company that's looking at international expansion, we're a really enticing proposition to be able to do that very easily and effectively. So that's kind of what we're targeting. I anticipate that we almost certainly will pivot towards going after more of these larger deals. But of course, it's never a good idea to walk away from your bread and butter. We need to be able, we need to put the scalable processes in place to be able to effectively service that very fast moving, very repeatable B2C software that we've always been really good at. But we also need to think about how we're going to grow effectively to get to the next steps. And realistically, that is going to be, the larger B2B SaaS businesses.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And, Ben, this is such an exciting conversation because in startups, when you're at any level, you can be so involved in like the future and direction of the company. What drives you to be attracted to the startup world, Ben? Why didn't you stay in like a much larger organization? Why didn't you stay in like a Groupon? Why did you come here?
I like a challenge.
Yeah.
More than anything else. It's what I love about revenue operations is more so than any, and I have done a few stints in other kinds of operations teams, incidentally. Because you're sat with the commercial teams, you need to be able to react fast. You need to be able to completely change your priorities. So you get the challenge from that perspective. But additionally, sales and marketing are the heartbeat of any company. You may say that you're working for a tech or product-led company, but fundamentally, in order for that business to be able to make any sort of money and therefore continue to be able to receive investment, you need to have an awesome sales and marketing function. Something that I absolutely love. I know personally that I am not a salesperson or a marketeer. I never have been. I'm very much I'm a creative thinker, but I'm an operations and I'm a process person. And so for me, this is the closest that I can get to that sort of heartbeat of the business. And it's something that really, really drives my day to day. Additionally, I'm not the sort of person who feels like they're really able to to build a definitive set of processes and then say I'm done. Paddle for me, I believe Paddle actually really needs someone like me in this business. I'm very fortunate to be able to say that Paddle also thinks that, hence I'm here. And I'm really excited to help to drive them to build these scalable and effective solutions.
Yeah, it's really powerful stuff. This is why I love speaking to people in Rev and Sales Ops, like their personal journey into the space and like their ambitions and kind of motivations. Always fantastic. Now that we haven't touched on one topic, I wanted to go into a bit more, but we were going to speak about rep adoption of new processes. Challenging. Lots of people always cite that when you have long-term sales reps in a business, they can be very slow to change. Ben, what's your assessment for why this sometimes goes wrong? And then secondly, what are your top tips for people trying to nail it?
Honestly, I think probably the biggest stumbling block that I come across on a relatively regular basis with this sort of thing is that enabling sales reps into tooling and processes is often just given over to the sales manager, to either the direct line manager, maybe to a sales coach, essentially to someone who's actually not a subject matter expert. It's very, very easy within the sales ops and rev ops world to design a process, to design a system, hand it over to the sales guys and say, look, this is awesome, we're done, we'll handle some bug fixes, but actually, we're not going to be any further involved. I think that's a real misstep that quite a few organizations make. Fundamentally, as the people who designed it, as the people who administrate it, you also need to be the people that can train it. And even from a very selfish perspective, that also enables you to get that direct feedback from the individuals who are using your processes and your software. So that's kind of number one. Someone new coming into the business absolutely needs to be trained by sales ops or rev ops functions in the tools that they're going to be using.
Yeah, okay. This is something I wanted to ask you earlier, but I suppose what I'm interested in following on from this is, where is the line between training and coaching reps? How do you know where to distinguish where it's appropriate for you to give training and coaching to reps, and where should it be the jobs of sales leaders?
I think that's something that needs to be very clearly delineated with sales leadership, actually, between sales leadership and revenue operations. It's if you leave it unspoken, then you're always going to have that. That's again another potential cause of friction, because no one really knows who's responsible for what. So it's about clearly delineating the actual responsibility. But then, I personally, I believe that revenue operations is responsible for tooling and process and data when it comes to training and literally anything that touches upon that. And that may even be a case of, we as a revenue operations function identify that we're potentially not targeting the right kind of customers, or a rep sending the wrong sort of messaging because it's actually not effective for the ICP that they're going after. That is the kind of coaching that we can do. However, when it's a sort of, this is how you effectively go and close someone, or start to talk about something like gap selling, start to understand the pain points, that's something that a sales coach really needs to get involved in. If it's more sort of data driven, then in reality I think that does fall within the RevOps wheelhouse.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose this has been the fantastic benefit that RevOps SalesOps has brought to sales teams. It's the data. That's where you guys really nail it. Now, we've mentioned a few times this issues of tooling, and it is really interesting because another function of ops is to be tool experts. Now, the confusing thing is there are so many tools on the market, and particularly when you're looking across different revenue teams. So I was wondering, Ben, how do you stay an expert in the tooling in the SaaS world? What do you do on like a weekly, daily, monthly basis to know that you're up to date with what's out there?
So to say, I'm a very strong believer, even as a department head, of getting stuck in. So for me, I maintain my Salesforce administrator credentials. Salesforce actually has some fantastic ways of continuing to train and actually build up people's skills. Trailhead is a fantastic resource. I recommend it to anyone who works within Salesforce, whether they're an end user, whether they're an administrator or a developer, or even someone who's just curious in using it. So I ensure that I engage with that quite regularly. Another very key part is I engage quite a lot with customer success managers for all of the tools that we purchase. And I do this in every business. I think it's vital to keep that line of communication open, because you're never, any tool that you purchase that's worth its salt is going to be continuing to improve, continuing to add new features. Actually, they're going to want to actually hear from you about any pain points that you're going to be having with the tooling. So keeping that line of communication open, I think, is absolutely vital. And it's having those sort of regular conversations, attending any sort of webinars, attending any conferences, ensuring that you're talking to your account executives or to your customer success managers, and really learn from them. One of the first things I will always do in any business is ensure that I have a good hour scheduled with whoever my Salesforce account manager is. Because they'll be able to tell me probably better than anyone else, anyone even within the business that I'm working for, what we actually have, what we can do, what their recommendations are. So yeah, I would say that's how to stay, to stay relevant with your tools.
Yeah, really great pointers. Now, speaking of learning from other people, this is a question I always like to close with. If you were in a room full of revenue ops and sales ops leaders, now let's imagine like the best in the world, what do you want to ask these people?
That's a very good question, Tom. I guess really what I would want to know is how do they see revenue operations? Like, actually, what is their actual approach to the function? I've worked with, I've had the privilege of working within revenue operations for about 7 years now, and I often find that everyone has quite different philosophies to how to approach it. I've seen some sales operations teams which don't really like engaging with salespeople because they kind of see that they're getting in the way of their nice shiny processes and tools. I've also seen sales operations teams that actually probably cross that line into sales coaching that we've already discussed. Fundamentally, they're really sales managers. They're not actually tooling and operations experts. So I think I probably would really like to know what their overarching philosophy is. How do you actually approach revenue operations? and I'd really want to know what their sort of key insights are. Is there any sort of kind of almost the questions that we've been talking about today? What do you do when you first get into a business to really understand what it needs, and how you can be effective? Personally, I'm a big believer that to be effective at revenue operations, you also have to be effective with people and with stakeholders. And so a big part for me of coming into a new role is ensuring that I set up those good relationships. We start on a very strong footing when it comes to trust and transparency. And so, yeah, I kind of would want to know what their sort of approaches are in that situation as well.
Yeah, and that's a good one. I've been speaking to lots of people who argue actually one of the best things revenue ops people do in a business is to form connections and relationships between different revenue teams who might otherwise be siloed. And that's not just through process, it's not just through data analysis, it's actually like an interpersonal skill as well. Yeah, interesting.
I think so, and it's often missing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think why I respect revenue and sales ops people so much is because they have to be able to juggle so many different plates, wear so many different hats, and have so many skill sets that sometimes can be almost antithetical, at least in perception. It's clearly not true in real life, but you think maybe a data person maybe isn't so good with personal relationships. That's not true, but that's the challenge that people have to be and go through in revenue ops. They have to really master so many different skill sets. So I think they're a very special bunch of people indeed.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great. I might be there myself, but I'm terrible at data analysis. So anyway, so to close, by the way, thank you so much. This has been a really interesting interview. I think particularly your piece around marketing alignment and what does a growing, scaling business need as they enter rapid growth in terms of marketing alignment and filling the top of the funnel is a piece lots of people struggle with, particularly people in sales ops who don't quite have the experience yet of the revenue kind of mindset. And I think that's something that's really going to help people.